Okay, I think let's kick off. Most are now in. Firstly, thank you for joining the session. This particular webinar is going to be a little bit more technical than the ones that we normally hold. So many of the webinars are more around functionality within the software and how you can use that functionality. This particular webinar is focused more on the technical aspects. It's kind of the tools that we use to do the installation and configuration of the software. Stephen's going to do the presentation. Just in terms of questions, you'll notice that you can post questions to the audience and to the panelists. As you need, just drop us a question. We'll try and answer them as we go through, but if we miss any, we have a section right at the end to wrap up with any questions and to address any outstanding questions along the way. So yeah, thanks for joining. So just a little bit on the webinars. Apologies for the last two. We typically do a webinar every single month. In December and January, we had to cancel those webinars. We will continue to do webinars through the year, this year. So this is the first one for 2022, but we'll do one every month going through. The next one is the 7th of April. We'll do a mix of more technical ones and then more software functionality ones. The next one we plan to do would be ideally would be focused on different picking strategies and how they work and so on. So that will be a really interesting one. But we'll hold them all the way through the year. Encourage you to obviously join them as they go. We do record them, so if the circumstances are that you can't make the webinar, we do record them and we do upload them to the website anyway. So that is a great backup. All right, good. Stephen.
Okay, so basically what we're going to be having a look at is the system manager. A lot of you would have used it. Some of you might not know about it, but I think the whole point here is to give you an overview of the system manager. As Anton mentioned, there will be some more technical aspects to this, but it won't be anything too complex. So just to quickly touch on what I'm going to cover, first of all, to give you an introduction to the system manager. I'll talk on that shortly. We'll have a look at prerequisites, the download and installation of the system manager, and then we'll go through a number of items within the system manager and what it can accomplish. So just to set the scene, the system manager really is or what is its purpose? It's kind of a tool that is used outside of the core DATASCOPE WMS product, and it's used to configure all the infrastructural elements, prerequisites, database linkups, SQL Server, all of those type of things to configure that and set it up on the WMS server. So when you're commissioning a new server or a new site, this is actually the very first tool that gets installed on that server before even the WMS, what's used to install WMS. Who needs the tool? Basically, this is suited for our DSPs who have a technical resource who's going to be doing WMS installs. But it also applies to on bigger scale sites where the IT department want to make changes to the WMS configurations. Maybe they're changing IP addresses, moving things around. It can be used for that too. So that's kind of where it fits into the picture of our entire system. Right, so the first thing we're going to touch on is really getting started with the system manager and downloading and installing it. So I'm going to touch on where to get it from quickly. It's available for our DSPs on what's called the DSP portal. Now that portal gives them a lot of information. Our DSP, for those of you who don't know, is a DATASCOPE solution provider. They can have access to this and it gives them a lot of content, downloads, release notes, etc. So if I quickly go over to our website and we go into that, our partners have got a login here. So we get our partner login. And this is where they can obtain that download from. Right, so on this section, as I had in my screen dump there, you'll see there's a section over here on the system manager. We open that up, and basically in here, we've got a lot of content around an overview of the system manager. So you can take a look at some of this content here. There's the download and install, and the place that that I was talking about to download is this little link over here. There's also to mention some technical notes on the system manager, which I'll touch on later. And then we go into some of the more detailed parts of it here. So there's a bit of content on the DSP portal. The main thing here that I want to highlight is the download. That download is an agent, so it's a very small download. I think it's around 3 megabytes. It's what happens is it gets installed, and then it will auto heal the system manager on your server. So it makes sure that the system manager on the latest version. And yeah, let's take a look. So I've got a server here which has got just really Syspro installed. It does have WMS on it, but it doesn't have the system manager at this point. So this is the agent file. The installation is relatively simple. We just literally run the MSI file and accept the standard default settings or default options. And it's a really quick install. Okay, so that's now installed what's called the system manager agent. So it will put a shortcut here called the DATASCOPE system manager, but it hasn't actually installed that yet because that'll now auto heal, what you'll see now when I run it. So it'll go and interrogate our FTP location, and you will immediately get this pop up on the first time you run it, saying that the system manager, a new version is available. Obviously, we haven't installed anything yet, so I'll say yes to that. And it'll go and download that from our FTP directory. Once the download is complete, it'll do an install, and then we can just take a look at what it's installed and where. Okay, application will run. Okay, so we've got it installed, version number at the bottom here, and these are there's a couple of very basic options which we're going to go into in a lot of detail now. Just to show you, if I go into the control panel, just to show you what's been installed from an add remove programs perspective, all of our software sits under here, and you can see there's the agent, which is the initial install I did, very small, okay, it's 8 megabytes, and then the system manager over here, obviously it's a bit bigger, 100 megs, and then the version number. So those are the two components that have been installed. Obviously, if you want to remove the system manager, both of those need to be uninstalled at a later stage if you want to take them away. Okay, so that covers my slide on kind of where to get it from, how to install it, and it auto heals, etc. So the next process is now to dive into the actual nitty-gritty of what the system manager can do. So as you saw, there's a number of options on the front panel that we can go through, and I'm going to go through each of those now. There's a slide on it, and then we'll have a look at the functionality as we go through it. The first one is what we call system configuration. Now, I don't want this to be misunderstood. So the system configuration from a system manager perspective is infrastructural. So it's all the infrastructure settings. It's not the processes within DATASCOPE WMS. So not how you do receiving and how you do bin transfers, etc. This is just, where's my SQL server, my Syspro server? What's my SQL login? Where's my Syspro server? What's its IP address? What databases are involved? So those are the type of things we're going to configure now. And it's registry based. It will save those settings to the registry, which I'll show you now as we go through that. Okay, so I'm going to fire up the system manager again, and you'll see it every time you start it, it will always run the agent. And then the agent will open up the system manager. Okay, so we go to system configuration, we hit next. Okay, so as I mentioned, this is broken down into a couple of sections. First of all, the SQL server details. Then we've got the Syspro server details and the WMS server details. The SQL server can be your name or your IP address. In this case, I've got the fully qualified domain name in here, the SQL username, and the SQL password. One recommendation is to not use the SA account here. Make a dedicated account for your WMS system. And for those who are wondering, you can put a specific port number in here. You simply put in a colon and then the port number, and it will connect to SQL running on a non-standard port if you do have that set up. Syspro server, we've got the IP address, again, fully qualified domain name or the IP address. And then your integration type. So DATASCOPE WMS interacts with SysPro using E.NET Business Objects, and those can be installed essentially right now in 3 ways. Web services, which is more legacy, WCF standard, and WCF load balancer. So for that, there's a couple of settings. So first of all, we need to know which of those you're running. If you're running web services, we need to know the site name. Now that's quite easy to obtain. If you hop onto your WMS, your SysPro server, and you go into your default websites, you should see something like this. This is SysPro 8. We've got the SysPro 8 web services. Now that name that we have over here needs to match the site name over there. If, however, you're running DSWCF, there's 2 settings. First is the name, and the second is the port number. That's obtained from the SysPro directory. If we go into program files here, SysPro, this is the load balancer folder. And then I've got a config file for the SysPro load balancer. We can open that. And very simply, at the top, there's 2 values. First of all, this one here, which is the endpoint. That's going to be your name. That goes over here. These are the default install names. So if everything's installed default, it should just work out of the box. And then your port number here, which sometimes is different, and that needs to match over here. I'm going to leave it on web services because that's what I'm currently got installed. SysPro version, that's basically 6.1, 7, or 8. I think mostly that's going to be sitting on 8. And then license type, we obviously support both standard licenses and runtime licenses from an E.NET perspective. And then finally, your WMS name and or port IP and the port number. So this I've set to localhost for the purposes of this. And then the port number that our web API is running on. This is again the default port. It can be changed, but the default, as I say, is 8081. If we click next now, the system is going to do some validation. It's basically going to verify SQL Server details, check the server exists, and validate that our account that we've entered here does actually work and you can log into SQL. It will also check that the IP address or the name for the SysPro server exists. It goes quite quickly, but you'll see some green ticks appear. Okay, the next step is going to be configuring the databases. And this is actually the final step to this particular process. The only reason I'm getting a warning here is that we use the SysPro DB. For those of you who know, the SysPro DB basically is the control database for SysPro. We use that to obtain a list of companies that are available in SysPro. If it's a non-standard name, because typically in the past, well, and to this day, some of them are called, the SysPro DB is named SysPro DB, just like it is over here. You can see it in the top right there too. If it's not named like that, you'll get this warning asking you to please tell it, the system manager, which is the correct name. So I'm going to select that one and go OK. If yours is named SysPro DB, you won't even get that warning. You'd come straight to the screen. Out of interest, you can click on this link at the top here to reopen that same screen if you happen to select the wrong database. Then we need to specify a couple of things. First of all, is this a WMS controlled company? Not all companies are going to be WMS controlled, so you can specify that by ticking the box, which will activate the rest of the form. Company password is pretty straightforward. And then the SysPro databases, we've got the main catalog and then also the SysPro inventory catalog. Now these are typically the same unless you're running shared inventory, in which case this one might be different. And then WMS, we have the company EDU1 and the control database. Now, this configuration is for I already had the databases. If we go to the next one, over here, this company is not currently configured. Now, if we tick on this box, it's going to actually ask me if I want to create the databases. So you can actually tick on that. It asks you, do you want to go and create the WMS databases, or are you going to specify them? So if you're starting up from scratch, obviously you can do that process. For this, I'm just going to untick that. And we go next. This one here is controlled, and you can see I've got the databases specified. And that concludes the configuration. So our base configuration is done. We know where all the servers are, we know how to log into them, we know how to interact with SysPro, and we know what databases to query. So that's the process of setting up the system configuration section. Okay. Next, we're going to have a look at the downloads and upgrades portion of the system manager. Now, these are two different options, but they are closely tied together. The download section really just lets you go and pull down a port, and then upgrades will let you take that port and actually apply it to the site. The thinking there is you don't want to download when you're doing the port. You want the port to be downloaded already. You don't want to waste time downloading port while you've got downtime arranged. So the thing is you can pre-download your ports and then apply them straight off the bat. The types of downloads are not only limited to upgrades, they also relate to prerequisites for the system. Installs and services, there's some key standalone services and installs that we have had in the past. I've put legacy here because the services are being migrated into what we call core services now. So those are just for some of the older versions of DATASCOPE WMS. I'll touch on the download location so you can see where the files are downloaded to. And then we'll go through an upgrade process where we'll select the file and actually run an upgrade on this machine. Just to touch on one thing quickly, I mentioned the release notes. So if we go back to the portal, the DSP portal, these are all available for our DSPs. So if you need to know what's being released in a particular version, these are updated on the release. If you look at this one, is the one we did in February. They are quite comprehensive release notes on every single ticket that has been logged in the system and the changes that have been applied to those particular tickets. So you can go through this if you're wanting to review what's changed. We also include at the very end of the release notes, get there. We also release all the hotfix versions prior to the main release. So you can see here, the main release version was this one here, 2789. And then subsequent to that, we've got, for example, 90, 91, 92, and what's released in each of those ports. So if you're on the version, you're just applying a port, you can skip to the bottom and check your ports. So that was just an aside on the, on the ports and upgrades section. So let's take a look at that. We can go to downloads, download a port to upgrade. Right, what it's going to do now is interrogate our FTP again and come down with all of the available ports that can be, and files that can be downloaded. The first we need to do is select one of these options, which is really filtering out what's available. So to show you on prerequisites, we've got barcode fonts here and some crystal redistribution packages. Then on ports and upgrades, which is probably the main use for this section, is our version numbering. So you can go into the February release as an example, and we can select one of the latest 3 ports. The other ports are available, but not through the system manager. If you need a specific port number, we'd have to, the DSP can arrange that, but this just shows you currently the latest 3. These are all available, so I can click on one and it'll download there. However, if you go to this release, which is only released, can be released in March, April, May. If you try and download these, obviously there's a password that's required to go and download those files. So that's the download process. Just touch quickly on the tools section. We've got a number of tools here that are useful, like the DATASCOPE Business Objects harness that's downloaded through the tools. This is a newish one. Our client-side printing, which is made for cloud-based environments where you were printing to a local, you have a local print server and you need to install the print server on the local machine. That's the little client that gets run. GAC Manager, that's useful for investigating version numbers on SDKs for developers. And the PickFace import, which is useful for stock when you're doing a new site and taking on stock. So there's a number of tools in here that we stick in here that can be used. Close it, sorry. Okay, so we covered the download. So that's how you're going to go and download those files. Just to quickly show you where those are downloaded to. If you go into your file browser here, you go into the program files, DATASCOPE, and then into System Manager. You'll see a download folder. And this is where that download process puts the files. Okay, so these are all ports over here that have been downloaded. And these are some of the tools and services, etc. that have been downloaded. So that's where that will push those files to. if you download the tools, it actually does let you save them to a different location, but the ports are placed in here. Okay, now we're going to move into an actual upgrade. So we're going to run through an upgrade and what processes are involved there. So select apply an upgrade. The system will do just some quick checks, like have you downloaded a file? Because you need to pre-download a patch or a port. Have you set up or got all the settings configured? Is SQL connection running and correct? So it pre-validates those things that we looked at in the system settings section. Because obviously if you come straight in here, you don't set anything up and you try and apply a port, it's not going to work. And then we validate some table sizes. There's some key tables that if they get quite big can hamper or make the upgrades slow. So that will give you a little warning symbol, and you can actually click on it and it will show you what tables are quite large. And that's in the DATASCOPE database.
Stephen, there's
Yes.
just a question here asking whether items can be deleted out of the download folder. So if you've downloaded, can you actually delete them out?
Yes, you can. So we can go and delete them out of here. That's fair game. You can delete everything in this folder with no problem at all. Thanks. I wouldn't delete it if they're busy running an upgrade or something like that, because this temp directory over here is used while we're upgrading. So obviously you don't want to do that, but yeah.
Cool.
Okay, so we're going to apply an upgrade. Once those checks are done, the next step is to select our download. So this will go and we'll have a look at the local directory. So this isn't looking at the FTP anymore. This is just looking locally and says, okay, what's available? For example, if we deleted 2 files, we'll only see the 140 there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the latest version here and go next. Obviously, this doesn't need a password here because I downloaded the file already. So I had access at the time to get the file. So what it'll do now is it'll go and verify and extract the content of that. So if we go and look at that temp directory I was talking about, you'll see this directory is filling up with files. So what it's doing is it'll go and take that single port file, extract all the files out and pop them into this temp directory. And then those will be used as part of the upgrade process. So let that finish. Right. Next step, we're going to get a bit of a warning. And the reason we're getting a warning is we're going to do an upgrade. And part of the upgrade is going to be the fact that we'll be shutting down IIS and we'll be shutting down the web API. So the system essentially is going to be offline for any users on the floor. We can't obviously perform an upgrade while they're working. So when I click the next button now, it's going to start the process. And I'm going to now talk you through what it's doing. And we can look at some of those processes as it works through them. So as I said, the first and kind of the last step is to stop IIS and restart. So that kind of locks the system down. Anyone who's operating the system will be kicked out and unable to transact during the time. And you'll see it'll go green and we get a tick. Okay, now what it's doing is performing backups. Again, if we go back to the same directory, the system manager root directory, there's a backup folder. In here, we create a folder every time you run an upgrade, and we place all the files that are going to be replaced into this location. Just as a safeguard, if you ever need to know what setting was, or maybe a file changed or something like that, you can come back here and double check if something has changed between the new version and the old version. Just a note, the SQL databases are not backed up at this point. So if you need to do a SQL backup of SysPro or WMS or whatever, then that needs to be done before the upgrade. We don't do that as part of our process. Okay, the next one is copying files. The files we backed up have now been replaced. So we've copied all the files over, replaced all of the content that needs to be replaced. And it's now doing the longest step in the process, which is updating the database structure. We use a tool here called SQL Compare from Redgate. Some of you might know it. Basically, it allows you to make a comparison between 2 databases on the fly and generate a Delta script to perform an upgrade on that on the database, the destination database. So the advantage of this over a scripting method, some systems use scripting where they'll have a standard set of scripts that get run on the database. That's in the ideal world when you know the destination and you know the source. In some cases, the destination is not always what you think it is, so the scripts fail. So this is a live comparison, and the scripts get generated on the fly. That's why it takes a little bit longer. They get executed and we upgrade the database. Right now, we are running some scripts, and these scripts are for master data. So what it does is after it's done the structure, we move over any master data. So if you look at palettes, you have a bulk palette and a pick face palette types. So there's a list of palette types. If we had to introduce a new palette type, for example, that is master data that needs to be transferred over to all of our sites. And that's the type of data that's being transferred in these scripts now. Okay, so now what it's going to do is there's a couple of MSI packages which need to be updated. And I'll show those to you now. If we go back to our download and our temp directory, so remember this is the extracted directory that came from our download, our port download. We can take a look at installs. So installs, you'll notice there's a couple of MSI packages that need to be installed. Web API, which is kind of is part of the backend system, the SDK for both for the system and for external development. And then our two web applications, the HTML5 interface and the KPIs. And then finally, core services. Now, those are being uninstalled one at a time and reinstalled. And that's what these pop-ups are. Okay, it's busy with the SDK at the moment. And move that out the way. While it's busy, the next two steps really is just around configuration. We'll do a quick update. It'll do a quick update on the client config. So we have a click once deployment of the client that'll get the config files will be updated so that it knows what the WMS server is. So when the clients download the new version, you can talk back to the WMS server. Same with the scanner config. That will be again the WMS server.
Stephen, there's just another question here while that's running. The question is, when you do the upgrade, if table sizes have got particularly big, so if your tables are now very large, what is your view on sort of cleaning up tables, or do you feel that we should not need to do that?
So it depends on the tables, and it also depends on the changes that we've made. So for example, if there's a primary key change on one of the tables, so we're changing the primary key, and the table has got a lot of data in it, it will have an effect on that because it has to copy those away and put them back. There's a lot of detail happening when it does that upgrade script. So it will extend the time that it takes to run the scripts. So the ideal is to try and keep those as controlled as possible. The warning that I get that it gives you in the beginning is mainly around our log tables. So a lot of our log tables can get quite large. So if you get any of those can quite easily be truncated. As a matter of fact, there is an admin section of the system manager which our DSPs have access to, that they can actually purge log files if they need to. So they can use that capability.
Would you suggest that that's probably a good thing to do during an upgrade?
For sure. Yeah. If it picks up that there's some large tables, definitely should try and limit those before you do the upgrade. Otherwise, the step here, this updating databases, could take quite a while.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you.
It also, as I say, it also depends on what's changed. So if you're only hopping one version or two versions, it's unlikely it's going to be a problem. But if you're doing quite a big upgrade, then definitely, because then there's going to be a lot of database updates potentially. The final step here is a summary view where it lists all the items it's done, success, and you do have access to the log files, which you can click on and have a look at them. So you can, for example, the database structure. If you really want to go and see what's been done, you can go and have a look at these logs. If we look quite far down here, if I find it now, there will be the database comparison. So you'll see here's a comparison of the databases. So it's saying these are all the things that it's compared, views, functions, etc. Just a note on the database comparison. If you create custom tables, custom stored procedures, there's no issue. We'll never remove those. However, if you go and add an index to one of our tables, the DATASCOPE table, that index will be removed if it hasn't been added to our core system. So if you find we sometimes have customers saying they found a particular element index that has made quite a difference to their processing time of a specific task, we'll evaluate that and we'll implement that if it has value for the system. So rather let us know and we can go and implement that so it can be rolled out in a proper manner. But if you stick a index into our table, it's going to get removed on the next upgrade.
Stephen, just a question. If that process hits some issues along the way, I'm assuming that view will show you where it failed, right?
Correct. The lines here will be red. So it'll show the line in red. It'll say failed here where it says success. And obviously then is when you need to look at the log. So click on the log, literally just control find, and you can search for the exception in there.
Yeah.
So that's why we've put the log access here.
Yeah, cool. We also have a fairly long question from Stefano, but perhaps we can answer that one at the end.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
Okay, so that concludes that section. So basically what we've done is we've done a port, we've downloaded the port and we've applied that port. Okay, let's hop back to my slides here. Okay, the next one won't take as long. This is really just to explain what this is. So it's called clean installs, and it's really, as it says, it's a clean install. So if you've got a fresh server and you want to commission WMS from scratch, you'd be using this option. Or if you're wanting to, you've really got a WMS server, but you're installing a new one, then you would again use this to commission that box up from scratch. So it's a more of a process-driven approach. So you'll see when we look at it, it combines a lot of elements that we've looked at already into a streamlined process of going from having nothing to a fully installed and running system. And it consists of the prerequisites, which I'll touch on now. The license, importing the license, the configuration, which we already looked at, the installation, which we've just done, and then post-configuration, which is new. As I say, it uses a lot of components that are already in the system manager. Just to touch on something before we go any further, if you look in again on the DSP portal, we've introduced a new section here with quite a bit of content around prerequisites and installations. So over here, this is mainly around the server itself. So this is kind of before you start installing WMS. There's a couple of prerequisites and server roles that are required. So if you take a look at this document, we've just recently put it together, and it outlines setting up the roles on this is a Server 2019 machine, but it gives you exact roles and the services that need to be installed on each of those roles. In the past, it's been a bit kind of hit and miss. So this is a very detailed document that gives you exactly what needs to be configured to have the system working. Okay, let's hop across here. So we'll do a clean install and go next. So what you'll see it does first, it verifies those server roles, and that's why I spoke about them now. Those have already been set up on this box, so don't need to be done, but you'll get red crosses all the way through if you haven't followed that document up front. So it'll validate these server roles. It'll then list out the software prerequisites, which the system manager will provide for you. If you don't have one of these installed, you will actually see a little install button appear next to each of these items, and you can go and install that. Basically, it's just barcode fonts and made sure you've downloaded a port. Those are all prerequisites that are available in the download section, which we looked at earlier under prerequisites. So you can also do them beforehand. This here is asking us to select the license, because keeping in mind, this is a fresh install. So we'll select the license, it validates it. I'm not going to copy it because it's already there. And then we can click next. Now here's where I was talking about we use other components in a streamlined process. This is the one we worked on earlier, which is the configuration that's already there. So we can just click next through that. This is a new screen for the clean installs. This is going to verify that your WCF or your web services have been set up properly. So we're getting an error there, and it's probably a typo on my side. So it's saying it can't connect to SysPro in this case. So we can go back. I think I know what it is. It's supposed to be SysPro 8 web services. We can go next. And we can try again. So it does an e.net login, and then it confirms that it can log into e.net before you can even move on. So that makes sure that Syspro is working, e.net's working, and we can log in. This is the same again as we had earlier. So I'll skip through it. This is setting up our databases. And now it's going to go into what we did in the very last step and apply a port. So here's where we're going to select our port. And this is where I'll stop for the process. And if we go next, it'll now apply and install that. So when I was saying clean install is a separate item, it is a separate item, but all it is taking the multiple different pieces and driving you through that process so that you can do it in a logical form for a new install. Okay. Right, and the last one I want to touch on is the services. So this section allows you to activate what we call different services within core services. So for those of you who are new to the DATASCOPE WMS might not know, but we've had in the past, a lot of individual services that have been installed, like a pick face replenishment, the black box monitoring system, some of our queue readers. There's a lot of little pieces. And the problem is when you do an upgrade, those are not pulled through in the upgrade. We don't upgrade those individual components. They need to be managed separately. So what we're doing now is we've incorporated what's called core services. It's a single service that manages everything, and it's activated and deactivated using the system manager. So that ensures that there's only one service, first of all, and the service is kept up to date with every port and every upgrade. So we'll take a quick look at that. Okay, so when I click next, you'll see it lists out a number of services here. As I mentioned, we haven't migrated all of the services into core services, but we have a heavy drive to go that way so that we can keep everything up to scratch and synchronized with the latest version. So what you can do is simply tick or untick the options you want here. So you can go through all of the services that you're going to be using, and then when you click next, first of all, it gives you a warning saying here, service changes will only take effect when the service restarts. So with the core service, if you make changes to a particular thing, a service or process, you need to restart that service. And then what it'll do is it's going to loop through. You would have seen we checked 3 of the items. It's going to loop through the 3 services that we're going to be using. So this is the print doc. I do believe there's some information on each of these settings here, so you can go into each of these. So it gives you some data around or some guidance on what needs to be configured for each of these settings that pertain to this particular service. So I'm just going to click next through these. It'll save the settings as we go through, and then it will shut down. Now, if we take a look at the registry quickly again, so where those services are also saved in the registry in the same location, they'll be like this one here. For the black box, we've got obviously everything gets prefixed with black box, and then you'll have the name of the particular setting. Here's automated invoicing. There's any of the print doc one. That's the print documents service. So those services are all configured here. Again, you can change the settings in the registry. Obviously, the only one you can't really do is the password, because the passwords, as you can see, are encrypted. But other than that, they're fair game. They can safely be changed in here without the system manager if you really feel like you want to do it that way. But yeah, that's where they're stored. And I think that kind of concludes all of the stuff in our allotted time. A little bit of time for some questions, I think.
Okay, so we've got this one question. I don't know if you can pull it up on your side, Stephen, from Stefano. It's just relating to a particular new installation he was working on.
Yeah, it says on a new installation, I was not successfully able to change the installation directory other than using the default installation path. Although the path is available and can be changed, we experienced some issues and reverted back to the default path. Larger sites. I just wonder what specific one we're talking about, because I assume he's talking about the main installation path. I don't know, Steph, if you want to just mention, are you talking about all of the components or a specific one? I mean, obviously, from a web service perspective, that is dependent on where the web service is being hosted, or the web directory is being hosted. But I think he's got a point there. He's saying
it says all the components.
Yeah, I think he's meaning everything. Yeah. Yeah. At this point, you cannot go and change those. It installs the web services installed on the main root drive. The web API and the other components, they can be installed on a different directory, but they would have to be manually installed individually. So it's a good point that he's making.
Mm-hmm.
Something we should look at. He's just saying there that some of the larger sites don't like to have their things or the installations on the root drive.
Yeah.
I
think that's all the questions. So we've answered all the questions. I think just to wrap up, thank you again for sticking with us through the session. As I said in the beginning, more of a technical session, but we need to have these technical sessions to share the back-end knowledge from a technical perspective. The next webinar will be on April the 7th. As I mentioned earlier, the focus of that would be to cover quite a number of our picking strategies. So from a functional perspective, the different ways that you can pick a product, which will be a very interesting session. So we're looking forward to having everybody back with us again in that session. But for now, thanks for joining, and we'll see you next time.